It was a classic bank run, took 36 hours until March 10th, and the bank was broke.
And yeah, I personally think that the crypto is not the reason why all these banks went down. Hi everyone, here is Francesco Emeris from the Crypto Valley in Switzerland. In the video of today we will talk about why our banking system is broke and what are the causes of this, and about the recent regional banking crisis and how this also affects the crypto industry. As always, we will start with a short clip from one of the members of the European Parliament, Godfrey Bloom, and where he talks about the problem of the fractional banking system.
Commissioner, Mr. President, I rise again, I'm afraid, to make the same old hoary speech that I've been making here for several years, and that is, it is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. All the banks are broke. Bank Santander, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, they're all broke. And why are they broke? It isn't an act of God. It isn't some sort of tsunami. They're broke because we have a system called fractional reserve banking, which means that banks can lend money that they don't actually have. It's a criminal scandal, and it's been going on for too long.
Okay, Francesco, so we heard from this gentleman in the European Parliament that he thinks all the banks are broke. And he blamed it on the fractional banking system. Maybe it would be interesting for the audience to hear what is fractional reserve banking.
So, in simple terms, the fractional reserve banking system is basically the possibility for banks to get the deposits from citizens and from people and lend it out, but just keeping a percentage of these actually in their accounts. So basically, to make it simple, let's say you are a depositor, I'm a bank, you give me 100 Swiss francs and I have a reserve rate of 10%, means that I only obliged to keep 10 Swiss francs on the account and I can lend out 90.
Interesting. And how is this related to the creation of money? I heard like fractional reserve banking allows banks to create more money, and not only central banks but also commercial banks can create money.
Yeah, exactly. It works like this. So we always think that like the only one that can create money is the central bank. It's the only one that traditionally can or always can print money. But actually also commercial bank can create money. And actually it's I will show you to you here in an example that I brought up. So we can look here. In this is actually explaining exactly how actually from a deposit of 1,000 Swiss francs we can actually create 2,600 Swiss francs, and basically it works like this. So there is a first depositors, which in this case is Alice, who deposits 1,000 Swiss francs at the bank. They just have to keep the 10%. Then what happens is that, as we said before, they lend it out, the rest of the money. They lend it out to Bob in this case. So Bob receives 900 Swiss francs. What is gonna do, Bob? But he can do whatever he wants, right? But with 900 Swiss francs, he thinks that it's a good idea to buy an iPhone. So he's going to the magazine, to the phone store here, and he gives them 900 Swiss francs that he got before. So now the store has 900 Swiss francs that they're going to deposit to another bank, wherever they have their account. And the bank is going to do the same process again. It's going to keep 10% of what has been stored there, of what the store gave them. So basically they're going to keep 90 Swiss francs and lend out the other 810 to Mike, which is another lender who needs money for anything else. And this process goes on and on. And just with this simple example, we have created new money. We have created exactly 2,610 Swiss francs.
Oh wow! So we heard from Godfrey Bloom that this system, in his opinion, is broken. But here we also see some like advantages. What in your opinion? What are like advantages and disadvantages of this fractional reserve banking system?
So one of the advantages of the fractional reserve banking system is that it stimulates economic growth. As we have seen an example, like from a deposit, someone else benefited and was able to purchase an iPhone on anything. So it really stimulates the economic growth of a country, and also is an important metric that is being used to calculate the velocity of money, which is the speed at which money circulates into an economy. the disadvantage of this system, it actually creates instability, because banks only need to keep a portion of the reserve of the depositor and lend out the rest. If the depositor doesn't repay this, then it creates a problem for the original depositor. So now that we have an overview of how the fractional reserve banking system works, actually this is one of the root cause of what caused the recent regional banking crisis. So maybe you can give us a glimpse of what happens, Marens, and let's talk about it.
We saw in the past month several bank runs. And the reason or the root problem for this was bank accepted deposit from customers and then they lend it out long term to, for instance, for companies or also for mortgages. And next, customers came back and wanted to withdraw their money. Mm-hmm. But the bank didn't have that money, and so this caused a bank run. One of the biggest issues was that banks purchased a lot of long-term treasuries with customer funds. And when interest rate rised, then these bonds, the value of them decreased.
Exactly.
So now customers came and wanted their money back, and these banks needed to sell their treasuries, and
a loss.
This created a loss. And when people saw that, they got nervous because they were not sure anymore whether their bank is stable, and they started to withdraw more money. And this created in the end several bank runs.
So basically banks receive deposit from customers, and basically what they can do is then they lend them out or they invest them in treasury. But if then a lot of people come asking for the money, then as it happened in this case, they don't have all that monies. So one of the examples is actually Silvergate, which was one of the first banks that blew up in this regional banking crisis.
Everyone is talking about the Silicon Valley Bank, but it started before that. And the first case is Silvergate Bank. And this was a very small bank from San Diego in the US. And they started to become the crypto bank because their CEO talked already in 2014 about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And then they attracted more and more customers. And what happened then is, because they were in a sector which was booming, more and more people deposited money. Right. And maybe you can quickly show like how the deposit of this bank here increased significantly between 2019 and 2022.
Wow, that's really insane.
But then you also see here a sharp decline in deposit because here FTX happened. And people started to withdrawing money because they knew that FTX had a connection with this bank, and 90% of deposit of this bank came from the crypto, were related to the crypto industry. Right. And what we can also see here is on the other side of the balance sheet, you can see what they did with the deposit. So they started to invest in more and more into securities, and which were long-term securities. And now people started to withdraw money, so they needed to sell these securities, but they incurred a loss on that. Right. And because of that, this caused a bank run. In the end, they needed to shut down, and this ended on March 8th when they said they would voluntarily shut down.
So, but on March 8th, also so there was this report from Silicon Valley Bank. They started to have problems. So there was Silvergate Bank, and then SVB. So can you tell us more about it?
Yes, Silicon Valley Bank was another issue because they were very active in the startup industry. So startups deposited a lot of money at the Silicon Valley Bank. And we all know in 2021 the startup industry was going very well. So a lot of money came into the system, into Silicon Valley Bank. Right. And the deposit increased significantly. I think from 60 billion to over 180
exactly.
billion in a very short amount of
in less than 2 years they tripled.
And so they had a lot of money, and they didn't know what to do with it, and they also started to buy treasuries of the US government.
Exactly, long-term treasuries.
But what happened next was that startups, they needed to withdraw money because they had some expense and not any more money came into the system. Mm-hmm. So they needed to sell the treasuries, and at a loss, because in the meantime the value of the treasuries decreased significantly. And on March 8th, as you said, they made a huge announcement and saying that they're doing an emergency sale. They also said that they incurred significant losses because they need to sell these treasuries in the past several months. And a lot of people saw that and thought, well, I'm not any more sure whether my money is safe at Silicon Valley Bank, and startups started to do a bank run. It was a classic bank run, took 36 hours until March 10, and the bank was broke.
So another interesting fact about SVB, the Silicon Valley Bank, is that they were receiving so much money that they didn't even need to do lending afterward. Basically what they were doing, they invested half of what the depositor gave them, so around 91 billions into treasury. They just invested there. They were not even lending it out.
Yeah. It was very interesting because this destabilized the whole system. First you had Silvergate, then you had Silicon Valley Bank, and then there was a third player. This was Signature Bank. And Signature Bank is a New York-based bank which is mostly active in the real estate industry. But they wanted to diversify, so they also started to accepting more and more crypto startups, and this also increased the deposit significantly. So at the peak, 25% of the deposits came from the crypto industry. It's not as much as with Silvergate because there was 90%, but still significant. And then people saw what happened with Silvergate, and they saw what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. And there was the trust system was gone. And they thought, well, they also had some connection with the crypto industry, so maybe my deposits are also not safe anymore there.
Right.
So on Friday, that Friday when Silicon Valley Bank was seized by the government, they also saw some massive outflows of money. People started to withdraw money. And in one day alone, it was more than 10 billion US dollar. So they needed to find a solution over the weekend. They wanted to refinancing, but they didn't find one. And they knew when they open on Monday, everyone will withdraw the money and they cannot meet it, so they will be broke. And in the end, the government seized it as well. And this was the third bank which went bust.
These were actually some of the biggest banks out there that blew up in the recent American history. Actually, biggest banks around, like filing for bankruptcy or being bought out. This was quite impressive. But like we have also an example that here in Switzerland, right? So actually we had over this period of time also Credit Suisse, what was the second biggest bank in Switzerland, also has been acquired by UBS.
Yeah, with Credit Suisse, something very similar happened as probably with Silvergate, because what the situation, so Credit Suisse is a very big bank also compared to these US banks, and one of the 30 most important, worldwide 30 most important banks, and what they had was a management problem over recent years.
Right.
So they were involved in every scandal which is out there, and this led to an erosion of trust of their customers. They didn't know whether their funds would anymore be safe with Credit Suisse. And so we also saw a bank run on Credit Suisse, and this was caused by a tweet of an Australian journalist. So this destabilized Credit Suisse a lot because you have a lot of money outflows then, and they could meet them back then, but they came into this period when they were very weak. And then Silicon Valley Bank happened, and we also had some message of a big investor from Saudi Arabia, which said they would not put any more money into Credit Suisse. And this then caused a bank run in Credit Suisse. And the interesting fact about this is, so people didn't believe that the money was safe anymore with Credit Suisse, and in the end it was sold to UBS. And interesting about that is that actually Credit Suisse had more money than Credit Suisse. It was better capitalized than UBS at that time. Maybe I can quickly show you this graph, and here you can see like how the capital ratio of Credit Suisse and UBS developed over time. And on the left-hand side, you can see UBS in 2021, 2022, and on the right-hand side, Credit Suisse in 2022. And you see that Credit Suisse had significantly more equity than UBS. And this was even true in the first quarter of 2023. They were better capitalized than UBS, but in the end, they still went down. And why was that? Because there was not trust anymore into Credit Suisse.
All right.
After we discussed some of these cases, we saw two banks were very related to the crypto industry. And there are now some people saying the current banking crisis is the blame of crypto. Most importantly, Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC, who recently told or implied that the current banking crisis is because of crypto. Now, it would be interesting to hear from you, is crypto to blame for the current banking crisis?
So of course Gary Gensler is going against all the crypto companies as we have seen, and yeah, I personally think that the crypto is not the reason why all these banks went down. And actually the troubles, the issues that were related to this are actually two. So the first one is that the business of these banks, of some of these banks, was heavily concentrated in one industry. Mm-hmm. For SVB was tech and health tech startups. For Silvergate and Signature Bank was crypto companies. The other problem was the risk mismanagement, where actually the management of these banks was not capable of handling the maturity of treasuries. There was a mismatch maturity between the treasury and what the customers needed to withdraw.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also agree with you. So crypto is not to blame because, of course, if the sector is doing well, then the banks also thrive, but it's going down, then the banks are also affected. And some of these banks were too much concentrated in one industry.
Yeah, as we have seen at SVB, the problem there was that this bank was receiving, in a short period of time, received so much money that they thought that they would have kept receiving this amount of money, and that's why they invested such a huge chunk of this money into long-term treasury securities. That afterwards, when the industry started to slow down, less money got deposited, startups started withdrawing more. As well as VC started withdrawing more to keep reinvesting and put money in their startups, in the startups of their portfolio. Then the SVB bank didn't have the money to give them and had to sell part of its treasury. And this goes into a spiral because if people realize that the company doesn't have liquidity, then of course they will start withdrawing, and this goes into a negative spiral that everyone at some point starts withdrawing because they don't want to be having the money there.
Yeah, and also it's not a big surprise that Gary Gensler is now blaming the crypto industry because he pursues a policy against crypto very offensively, against the crypto industry. But still, crypto startups are now heavily affected by this. In your opinion, like how are crypto startups affected by this recent banking crisis?
I mean, basically they were gonna have a hard time now find banks that wants to accept them. Already we are here in Switzerland and we know how hard it is for a blockchain or crypto startup to have a bank. I cannot even imagine in the US how hard it is to now have a bank. And another problem, one of the problems that I imagine there is that at the time there were only few banks accepting crypto startups, like was the Silvergate, Signature Bank, all this, and of course all the startups, all the companies were going in this. So these banks were clearly overexposed to this industry. But what if all the other banks would have accepted them? The risk would have been much more widespread, and this would not have happened.
Yeah, so for Silvergate and Signature Bank were very important banks for the crypto industry. Silvergate operated a Silvergate exchange network, which allowed all the big crypto exchanges to settle their open positions without any wire transfer. And this was huge for all crypto exchanges. Right. And now the system is gone. So this is a big setback for the US crypto industry. And Signature also had a similar system in place, but which was based on blockchain and is similar to Ripple. And also this system is now gone. So you have two central pillars of the US crypto industry, like service providers, which are now gone. And this heavily affects the US crypto industry.
Yeah.
And another thing is USDC is a stable coin. And this is very important for decentralized finance, because it allows to have a kind of a US dollar in the system. And as a stable coin, every USDC should be worth $1 US.
Right.
And in order that this system functions, the USDC needs to be backed. So they need actually $1 in deposits.
Exactly.
And this is what the Circle, the issuer of the USDC, did. And where did they park the money?
Or at SVB.
At SVB.
But this is the problem, that why crypto and the crypto industry is really affected as well by this regional banking crisis, because the crypto industry is dependent on the traditional banking system, right?
Exactly. So in the case of the USDC, they had more than $3 billion there at the Silicon Valley Bank, and they could not access it at one point. And what happened with the USDC? The USDC was not worth $1 anymore, because everyone knew that the money was there blocked. I mean, they even publicly announced it. So it depegged, and the USDC was below $1. And this was huge for the crypto industry. I remember when we were at the weekend and I saw that it was no one believed that this could happen.
No, exactly. No one would have expected this. Like that could have really happened.
And as you said, in the end, it's funny. Crypto didn't cause the banking crisis,
right?
But in the end, crypto industry was destabilized by this banking crisis.
Exactly, but at the end, exactly, to go back quickly to the point, the problem was the maturity mismatch of these banks and a bad risk management system that they had internally. So we'll look into how fragile is actually the reserve banking system. And so what are some of the alternatives that we have nowadays? What would you think could be a potential solution to this?
If you have banks which take short-term deposits and which lend it long-term, you always have this problem. You always have this instability, and there is always the risk that you have a bank run. So in the end, every bank on the world will be bankrupt if enough people decide to withdraw the money the next day. And if you want a more stable system, then you need to get rid of the bank.
Right.
And the question is that possible? And there are some theories out there that this would work quite well. And how does it work? So instead of depositing the money at the bank, for instance, you would put it directly to the central bank. And the central bank doesn't do anything with the money. You can always withdraw it from there, so you don't have the risk with a bank run.
Right.
And then the next question is, of course, okay, how can people then lend money? And this is also possible. You don't need a bank to lend money. I can also lend directly to you. So this would be, for instance, a crowd lending. So in theory, we don't need a bank. We can unbundle these services, and in the end, we have someone where you can deposit the money. Then we have some service where you can transfer the money, for instance, Revolut. And then you have also some services which allow you to lend money out. And the benefit of that system would, of course, be that you don't have these huge risks for the economy.
So the system you just mentioned, of course, will have a lot of benefit, and I'm really optimistic about the growing community and the growing number of fintech startups that hopefully can bring us into a better financial future. Thanks a lot to get to the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it and you learned something valuable for you. We'll get next week with a new video, and hope you learned something from why our banking system is broken. So put a thumb if you like it, and subscribe to our channel.